Welcome to another episode of Civil Rhetoric. Today, our guest is going to be Joey D. King. He is a virtual streamer. I am looking forward to having this conversation because, one, it's going to be able to be wild and free and actually kind of encompass any and everything that anyone would feel necessarily too afraid to discuss of. This is going to be an open discussion. If you are triggered by anything in the world that you might deem insufficient to your own way of life, I'll give you the trigger warning now, although I doubt we'll end up, crossing that bridge, but let's go ahead and see. Joey, please introduce yourself and let's go ahead and get started.
Yes, I am Joey D. King. You can call me Joey. You can call me King, JDK, Joe King, whatever suits your fancy. Just don't call me D. I am a virtual streamer. By day, I work the 9 to 5 as a mime. By night, you might catch me streaming on usually Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. So I have a stream coming up this Thursday. But yeah, thank you for hosting me, Larry. Let's get to it.
All right, sounds good. And with that said, we'll go ahead and jump right into this. As everyone is aware, this series is going to be focusing along the lines of what the definitions are to each individual personally of masculinity and femininity, as well as how those are shaped by the surrounding sphere, whether it be friends, family, society, or even just the kind of media that we consume. So, with the very first question, JD King, I like that, or even Joe King. I like that as well.
Joe King, yes.
We'll go ahead and ask, how would you define femininity?
So me being very masculine presenting, I would say femininity would be described how I would say it as essentially being things pertaining to females in current day, current year, current time. And I say that last part because it is very important that we know the context of when and where as well. Um, so the reason, because these definitions are very sort of fluid, very much in flux, I'd say, dependent on where and when you are. And I actually have a very specific example of that. Do you mind if I go off on a bit of a tangent?
Not at all. Go for it.
Yeah. So I remember when I was a kid, um, vampires were very manly, or considerably manly, right? Like werewolves, vampires, any of the classic Victorian monsters, the slasher movie killers, right? Like Jason, Michael Myers, all of those things, monsters or slashers, were considered particularly manly. Then I remembered somewhere, like, I don't remember how old I was, but like maybe teens or young adultish, the Twilight series came out. After the Twilight series came out, vampires were considered unmanly and then became considered feminine, right? And I was going through this transitional period where it was like, okay, so if I'm a vampire, now again, I was like a kid or young adult. So it was like, if I was a vampire for Halloween, that would be considered not masculine. It would be considered feminine at the time. So it had this switch just like that. All it took was the Twilight. Well, not just the Twilight series, of course, but the Twilight series sort of kick-started it, right? So that would be a very specific example where I witnessed with my own eyes something go from masculine to feminine, right? And I think this happens all the time with almost anything, right? Like vampires is just one example, but you could take anything masculine, it could be feminine now or later. Take something feminine, it could be masculine, right? All these are very sort of in flux, as I said before, right? So it depends when and where we're talking about. So if I was to try to define femininity now, that might not be like if I was to try to define it with examples, like how I say, this is feminine, this is not feminine, that might not be true like a month from now, a year from now, a decade from now, right? Because these definitions are very sort of in flux.
I would agree. There's a bit of fluidness that kind of comes with it. It's funny that you mentioned Twilight and how that kind of changed the idea and the concept of what that vampire was. It's something I've actually never considered. And even as we're discussing this now, I'm kind of digesting it mentally. But I do recall when you thought of Dracula, you thought of this charismatic, you know, stoic individual who was able to kind of basically bewitch just about any woman that he wanted. And I do find it interesting that when Edward, I believe his name is,
I
came
believe so.
along, how it was a thin, frail, pale, guy. And then this person did kind of take that entire, idea and concept of what a vampire was and made it a little bit more androgynous. I like the way you say how it depends on the time and place of things. I would kind of allude this to maybe this is more of the late 70s, early 80s, where you go to a dance club and as Dave Chappelle said in his in his skit, you have guys that were dressing and buying their clothes from the women's section of Nordstrom, and then now you have it to where that's kind of it's starting to kind of float back in that direction. With that in mind, how would you define masculinity?
So masculinity is kind of the same thing, but I feel like I'm more in my element now because I've been living a very masculine life for, well, most of my life essentially, right? Um, and I say, essentially because these things are so in flux. I never really know when I'm in masculine, when I'm in feminine, because I feel like everyone has some mixture of both, right? Like it's hard to say one acts entirely masculine, entirely feminine, because these things are always up to different interpretations of what's popular, what's not popular, what people are considering masculine, people are considering feminine, and when and where it is, right? Like I believe in the Middle East, it's considered very manly for men to hold hands, right?
Yes.
It's a very masculine thing, but over here in the States, are you in the States as well? The United States, the West, something like that?
Yes, I am. I'm actually in Los Angeles, California. I'm specifically in the San Fernando Valley, but if you're not from here, most people don't know where that is. So I always say Los Angeles because people know LA.
Oh, okay, I see. Yeah. So, like, for the majority of my life in the States, holding hands with another male would be considered not masculine. Whether it's considered feminine or not, that's actually kind of interesting. Where things fall, where it's sort of neither masculine nor feminine. That's a very interesting void to sort of be in. Like, I don't know, for example, the color green, is it feminine or masculine? Well, who really knows at this point, right? It might be masculine like by tomorrow or it might not. But wait, sorry. Could you repeat your question? I feel like I went on such a tangent there trying to explain my answer that I forgot what the question was.
Oh, no problem. It's just how you would define masculinity.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. So, um, I guess currently, right, in current year, current time, current place, I would describe masculinity as, mm, I guess it's a very evolutionary, it's a very evolutionary aspect of men. And I could describe it like that because I noticed there are a lot of things about men and masculinity that come from things we do from an evolutionary standpoint. Like one thing I tend to notice a lot is fighting seems to almost always be masculine. Almost always. You could probably find an example somewhere in the world at some point in time where fighting would be considered not masculine or feminine or, neither in between. But almost always I tend to find fighting is almost always masculine. And I feel like that comes from an evolutionary standpoint, right? Like, men would be fighting a lot. And have we really outgrown that in our like current, right? In our current status as more of like a civilized species? Well, maybe not really. Maybe not really. Like if you've ever seen Fight Club, right? The big point of Fight Club is that they is well the fighting obviously and one don't talk about Fight Club, but the fighting aspect of it is part of their masculinity, right?
Oh, definitely. I would actually agree. For myself, I've kind of toyed around with this and kind of flipped it around in my head a bit. When I do think about masculinity, and I do associate with that with some form of combat, whether it's being prepared for combat or actually engaging in combat itself. And I do believe that that has a strong tie to the levels of testosterone that we have in our body.
Right.
And on top of that, I also believe that, which is about 17 times the amount that a normal woman has in her body. And I do think it also kind of blends into like even our evolutionary physical traits. Men tend to have denser bones than most
Right.
women. Men have larger hands, and also even just the calcification around the knuckle area and things like that. Those were formed not for picking berries, not for getting food, or not even for defending yourself from a predator. Those were formed in order for us to do combat with each other. Especially why on the front of our forehead it has the most. It is the hardest part of our body, and it's made for that kind of face to face you know form of combat. The one thing that I do unfortunately agree with you on is that fighting does typically tend to be kind of walking hand in hand, pun intended, to an extent, with masculinity. And it is the, I want to say like the dwarfing or the complete just holding down of anything outside of anger or aggression. And I know for myself, growing up, it was extremely difficult for me to express anything other than anger,
Mhm.
because if you showed that you were, sad, or even if you were just showing that you were kind, a lot of times that kind of made you a target. And then most other men,
I can
especially in
relate
my
to that.
area, they would
Mhm.
just kind of attack. And then it kind of led myself to become someone who was more of a representation or a caricature of who I really was. And instead of being a because internally, like, I'm a larger male. And in my other podcast, I typically have video available. Unfortunately, today, just with work and everything getting in the way,
Right.
but I'm 6'2". I've always worked out. I've always been athletic. So I'm a larger man, and by being a Black American male, there's already an amount of aggression and stigma that kind of comes with that. And
I
on
can
top
relate
of
to that,
being
yeah.
yeah, it's unfortunate that a lot of times the schemas and the roles that people place us in based on their first impression and what they see typically end up being what everyone's kind of forced into. And for myself, I never was really allowed to cry. I was never really allowed to do anything along those lines. And it created this very rigid and incomplete human being. And only until relatively recently, maybe the last 7 to 10 years of my life, have I been able to even begin considering exploring the other aspects of what I am and what it is to be a man, and kind of trying to broaden the definition of masculinity, versus it being anything that's gender specific or anything along those lines, and trying to get to a point to where I can just be comfortable in myself. I do believe that being masculine presenting or being a masculine male does come with a series of things that we need to live up to. And when I say live up to, it's not about necessarily going out and engaging in combat, but nowadays, I do believe it includes being a provider and being a protector, especially since we're not out in the forest anymore, and the family doesn't eat if you don't go ahead and kill that deer or that buck. So
Right.
it's an interesting conundrum to kind of be in, because we're in a very interesting time in human history where we're going through these technological advances that kind of place us in a position to be able to evolve, yet our primitive state is still not quite capable of taking that step in evolution. And I think that's why there's so much infighting and turmoil among the different political spheres, the different gender spheres, the just everything with an ism or alsm, so to speak, here in America. With yourself, especially electing to become more of a virtual presence online, how do you feel that's influenced you in terms of your day to day life and how you present, and even the character that you created?
Ah, yeah. So I am in a very interesting, peculiar scenario, right? Um, because honestly, I don't really know anybody outside of my family, which is very small, right? Like, coworkers, friends, acquaintances, they don't really know me. Or really, like, honestly, like, if anyone I knew was to see any of the things I make, I doubt they'd be able to pinpoint it's me, because I swear to God, I literally never speak above like -7 decibels to anybody outside of my family, right? So this my normal speaking voice is like complete mystery to everybody. That doesn't mean, like, I don't take my virtual presence and stuff like that seriously, but rather I'm in a very interesting scenario where I could afford to be lenient with it. I still choose not to, because it's good habit forming. So, like, I could just go about my normal life as if like I'm not a streamer, right? I have things set up in such a way that I could literally just like drop streaming like that, like the drop of a hat, right? I just turn off a phone, turn off a computer, and like I'm gone. No one would ever be able to contact me from any of my streaming circles, anything like that, right? I'm not going to do that because I love the art, the performance art of it, right? This has been a very fulfilling journey, honestly, ever since I started. Um, so in terms of how being a virtual streamer changed things from day to day, I would say it's been a very positive outcome. And even though I say that I don't recommend this to everybody, I could get to that later, but um I would say that ever since I started streaming, I've been lot more fulfilled, honestly. Like, before I started streaming, I was overweight. I never did any of my hobbies. I just lived life from day to day to day, right? Um ever since I started, now this isn't directly related to streaming. There's actually a third thing that's influencing both my streaming and my weight loss and things like that. But ever since I started streaming, I've lost weight. I've been drawing every single day. I've never gone a day without drawing. Before this, I would draw maybe 3 times a year at best, right? I was fairly mediocre, but I would also barely practice drawing anyway, right? And I would just sort of live through the motions. But like now that I started streaming, I've had something to do, something more meaningful than what I've been doing before.
I actually really like that concept. I kind of found myself at the same precipice, so to speak, when I was younger. I'm 39 now, I believe. I need to check, but I believe I'm 39, 39 or 38, one or the other. And I do recall being a younger man and kind of having hobbies that I was interested in that I'd have to pretend or fake that I wasn't. As an example, when I was in high school, I always played sports and I was fairly good at sports, but I really loved playing this card game called Magic the Gathering.
Oh
Um,
yes, I played Magic.
oh god, okay, cool. Like Urza's Destiny, yeah, like Planeswalkers, like that is kind of like my era. I love
Hmm.
playing. The downside of it is I was so placed in a role of being a quote unquote jock that the kids that I played with and associated with, it was almost in secret. So anytime after practice, I'd rush over to the lunch area so that I can get a quick little like sealed deck tournament in or something along those lines. And then anytime if someone from, the baseball team, the football team, the basketball team, or the track and field team, if anyone saw me doing it, I would just say, "Oh, one of these kids are over here helping me with my homework."
Mm.
And it's kind of sad that I look back at this and I do see that I do look at this with regret because even the kids that I played with, they were probably the people I talked to the most because I felt like I could be honest with them. We talk about anime, we
Oh,
talk about writing and things of that nature. And that was stuff I couldn't share with everyone else because, again, I was kind of placed in this box that I allowed myself to exist in. And they would actually just play along with that. And that's one thing I very much so look back on in my life with regret. And that's more than likely one of the only or one of the very few things that I do regret, and it's because of the fact that I allowed the world around me to dictate who I was, and I basically bought the pill, I bought the line, I bought everything in hook, line, and sinker, and now I with my son, like, I look forward to being able to show him that the most masculine or feminine thing that he can do is be comfortable in who he is and allow both of those polarities to exist within himself because we can't be all of one thing. I mean, if the world was every man was just masculine and not feminine and every woman was feminine and didn't have any kind of masculinity in her, this would be a very scary place to live, I believe. And I hope with doing this and having these open discussions, people can see that you can exist within both realms. Because at the same time, I still like to lift heavy things. I still woodwork, I still do all that stuff, but I also like to garden. I like to make soap, I make candles. And then every time I buy stuff and like or I give it out as a gift, everyone's like, "Oh, your wife made this." I'm like, "No, I made this. I crafted this by hand." And I break down like all the scents that I use and all the different oils or if I use any animal fats. And it's something that I'm passionate about. And I don't allow it to kind of get silenced the way I did with Magic the Gathering, the way I did with anime. Now I proudly represent anime. In most of the interviews that I've done, I actually have a Cowboy Bebop it's a little LED lamp that I use for my backlighting, and I love Spike Spiegel, like, that guy is a character that I kinda see myself in, and I love representing that wherever I go, and even when it comes to the name of the website that I chose and the name that I use as a username, which is Chozen, Xiozen, I think it's an homage to Shaolin Showdown, which we spoke about earlier,
mhm.
but
Yes.
it also is just me kind of breaking out of that shell that I had been placed in before. Because usually when you see a 6'2", 6'3" black guy, I wear boots most of the time. Most of the time I wear boots. I have on a flannel or anything that's like necessarily form fitting. And there's an idea and there's a concept of what people kind of create when they see me. And now I let them have that concept. I let them keep that concept. And if they ever want to dispel it or confirm it, they're more than welcome to come talk to me. And I think that's helped me in my life. With you and your character, I do. really love the fact that you're able to kind of do the things that you don't do in your normal everyday life. Do you feel at times that when you even created joking, when you created Joey D. King, and is the D for Monkey D. Luffy, by the way, from One Piece, or is
Oh,
that
you got that. Actually, yeah. So my siblings actually got me into One Piece, and I remember one day my sister was like, "Oh, all the important characters have D in their name, like in the middle,
yes.
right? Monkey D, Luffy. I think Ace has a D, like Ace. Okay. I think Trafalgar Law also has a D, right? Is Trafalgar
And
D Law?
Garp has one as
Garp.
well.
Yeah. So she just started naming off all the characters. I'm like, oh, that's kind of funny. What does it mean? I was like, I don't know what it means. So I was like, okay, I'll just throw that in. Because before my name was just going to be Joey King, which is of course, a pun. We all like our puns here. A little paranomasia for Joe King, right? Because I could have just been very on the nose and just call myself Joe King, but that'd be like too obvious. So I went Joey King, slapped on the D in the middle, Joey D King, and now it's I just like the ring to it, JDK, Joey D King. And yeah, that's just how that name came about. I feel like you had two questions. One, was it a One Piece reference, and a second question, which I forgot. Sorry, my memory's not so good.
Oh, no worries at all. The first one was the One Piece reference, and the second one was referencing in terms of the creation of your character, the outfit that your character wears, the presentation of their face, all of that. Did that have
Ah,
anything to do, like, in terms of how that came about?
yeah. So this is always an interesting story. I never tell the full story because there's parts in the story that are a bit too personal. But the parts I can tell is, one day I was sitting down watching virtual streamers, as I usually do, right? I have some that I like to watch daily, things like that. And then I noticed the YouTube icon on the top left corner, right? They sometimes YouTube will do this thing kind of like how Google does, where they'll change the logo to represent something that they want to
Yes.
talk about. One day they changed the logo to represent virtual streamers. I'm like, oh, this is anime. Oh no, this is virtual streaming. And then I realized, okay, virtual streamers have become very kind of mainstream now. Now that YouTube has given them recognition. Back when I watched them, it was very like kind of underground. Um, but now it's like mainstream. It's getting like a lot of, well, not a lot, but it's getting some fairly amount of mainstream recognition. So now, basically, it's popular, right? So then, some stuff happened, some personal stuff, and then I asked myself, well, every good thing, every good popular thing has a parody of it, right? Like Disney, right? Like Disney fairy tales have Shrek, right?
Yes.
Um, right. Shonen battle anime has One Punch Man. Sci-fi has Warhammer 40K. Everything that's popular has some big main, right? South Park itself is sort of just a satire of like, celebrity culture and things like that. Everything that's popular and mainstream has its own parody of it. But virtual streamers, I couldn't find a good well, not a good, but any parody of virtual streaming, honestly. Like I looked at some of the most obscure virtual streamers, and they're kind of just doing the stuff other virtual streamers do, but just in a more kind of unique way. I want like a true to form parody, like Shrek, like Warhammer 40K, right? um and I did so much work into this. Actually, did you know there are three different types of parody?
No, I did not. Would you mind
Yes.
explaining?
Yeah. So the first form of parody is called, I believe it's called exaggeration parody. Exaggeration parody is essentially kind of like One Punch Man or Warhammer 40K, where you take whatever you're parodying and you put it to the extreme. Like One Punch Man, he beats them all in one punch, one super devastating punch, right? Regardless of how strong they are, right? So, or like Warhammer 40K, right? They take sci-fi and they put it to the craziest extreme you can imagine. Are you familiar with the Warhammer 40K?
Yes, I am.
Yes, it's in the super far future, almost way farther than any other sci-fi I know. Right, most sci-fis are like what, a couple hundred years, 1,000 years. 140K is like 40,000 years in the future, some ridiculous number. And everything, since you're familiar with 140K, everything in 140K is absolutely extremely over the top. Right, the Emperor of Mankind and his full golden armor, and the Space Marines and the orcs and the tyranny. It's all the most over the top stuff I've ever seen. That would be exaggeration parody. Just take what you're parodying and just make it to the extreme, right? The next kind, the second type, is inversion parody. Inversion parody is where you take something and you invert the concept of it while still maintaining its core values. So Shrek would be inversion parody, right?
Oh.
Because it still follows the kind of formulaic hero's path that's very common and almost core to Disney fairy tale, right? You have like Prince Eric, you have all these princes, and they all kind of follow the same hero's path, right? They fight some demon, some monster, some dragon. They get the girl happily ever after. Shrek follows that same formula, but the only difference is the protagonist is an ogre. It's inverted the expectation of the protagonist being, some prince or whatever, to just being an ogre, right? So that would be inversion parody. The third type, I believe, is called. It's been a while. I know the concept of it, but I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's simplification. No, it's not simplification. It's something else. But essentially, the third type is very close to satire. It's essentially closer to South Park parody, where you take something and you essentially oversimplify the concept to sort of make it, sort of make jokes about it, right?
So would that be kind of similar to like I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but C Lab 2020, where they took an old show which was a serious, well, not serious, it was still an animated show about, people having a lab under the sea, and they kind of turned it into something that was a bunch of people who were still have a lab under the sea, but they're all quite silly and quite, exaggerated in their antics. However, it's still kind of broken down to not only its simplest form, but it's like a more looking at it with a completely logical eye, to where it's like these are the things you would see on the original show and say, well, I wouldn't, how would that work? How would this work? And then what they do is they kind of delve into why it doesn't work or why it wouldn't work.
So I'm not familiar with that show, but from how you described it, it sounds like that would be it. Let me just hold on. Let me just look it up. There's exaggeration, right? There's inversion, because I know this is going to kill me, like not knowing the third one.
I'm the same way.
Trivialization. That's what it's called. Trivialization parody. Those are the three types of parody. And you'll see this in some of your favorite parodies and things like that. But what I wanted to do ever since I started looking up on parody and crafting Joey's character, because Joey's character is all based on parody. The name is a pun for Joe King, joking, right? So do you mind if I just ask you a quick question, just
Go for it.
mainly because I'm just curious, but out of those three, which form of parody do you think Joey is? It's exaggeration, inversion, and trivialization.
I mean, honestly, based on the conversation we've had thus far, I would say that he's a bit of a blend of all three. I
Okay.
did take the time to do a little bit of looking into, because I do this anytime anyone comes on, just so that I make sure that I can prepare proper questions for them. I kind of look into what their presence is online, and from what I can see, it's not so much the very first one, which is more along the lines of like the Wayans style of humor, like Scary Movie and things of that nature.
Right.
I think in terms of what it would be the closest to, especially with understanding where the name comes from, I think it would be closer of a blend between the trivialization and the second one, which I can't recall the exact name for.
Okay. So that's actually interesting that you said that. So when I started, I wanted to blend all three, right? Then I realized I was getting a bit in over my head. So what I did was I split each part of the parody into a separate character. So Joey himself, I would say, is closest to inversion parody, because usually a virtual streamer, they're very pretty, they have very good makeup on, they're very eye, eye appealing, right?
Yes.
Um, but there's no rule that says you have to look like that. So I can invert it, right? I can make Joey look more kind of like me. Like, actually, when I started making Joey, my body type was much closer to Joey's, but ever since I lost the weight, I think it's inaccurate. But yeah, Joey's a bit overweight. Joey has a bit of an older gentleman. Doesn't really have the best looking face. Sorry, Joey. But like, that would be the inversion of it. And then I made a second character that would be the exaggeration parody, right? So kind of like what One Punch Man is or Warhammer 40K is. I took all the aspects I could think of a virtual streamer, put it in one character, and turned it up to 11. That character's name is Miss Perundies.
Huh.
Pear Undies. Yeah. It's a character I mentioned
Interesting.
sometime. Yeah. Her name is also Paranomasia for parody, Miss Pear Undies, parody. Um, and her whole story is that she is Joey's Oshi. If you're familiar with the term Oshi, that's essentially your most favorite VTuber, the one you support, right?
Correct.
Oh, I did a bit of a slip there, but that's fine. So I just took anything I could imagine about a virtual streamer, put it in Miss Perundies, and say she just did it way more, right? I say, she's had a million streams. I say, she's beaten in an AI streamer in an endurance stream, right? Um, just the most ridiculous for good comedic effect, the most ridiculous stuff I could imagine. She's done it, and she's just the perfect streamer. That's what makes her the exaggeration. And then the last one was a bit tricky. The last one would be trivialization parody. So that would be kind of like the scary movies. That would be kind of like South Park, right? Um, Now, personally speaking, as a sort of writer, content creator, I would say my biggest strength is in inversion parody. I could take almost any concept and make a fairly compelling inversion parody of it. I would say trivialization is probably my weakest. Um,
Really?
yes. So I just really tried to emulate other trivialization parodies like South Park and things like that. And this might just be surface level things. I'm sure there are other people that could write it way better than me, but I noticed there's a lot of swearing in sort of trivialization parody. There's a lot of swearing. There's a lot of sort of toilet humor, things like that. I wasn't against that, but it wouldn't fit Joey's character. So I made a third character. Her name is SAT, which is short for sad and tired, which is obviously paranomasia for satire.
Yes.
Yeah. So
I find that interesting. I'm sorry to cut you off there. I find it so interesting because when I look at Joey and when I saw him originally in the creation and the outfits that he wore and even just like the way he's standing right now with like thumbs out and whatnot,
the
I
thumbs
find
out,
that
arms splayed. Yeah.
yeah, I find that extremely interesting because the place that it put me in was Waiting for Godot, and even and I'm gonna pronounce did butcher the pronunciation of the name, the I Pagliacci song, the crying clown, and it's that's funny because that's where I would have taken it based on how the character was displayed before hearing the voice associated with it, or even the mannerisms that I've noticed that he's been taking throughout this time. For whatever reason, that's just something I've always paid attention to. I'm hyper vigilant, and I have no idea why, and I can't turn it off. And even when speaking with a character who is virtual, I do the exact same thing. I pay attention to the eye flutters, the directions that the eyes go, and hearing that you're a person that's actually created the character on your own, I can definitely see where I can see where it's intentional. So I did want to just throw that out there before I forgot it, but please continue.
Yes, yes. Just to pat each other on the back of it. I do appreciate that you really notice a lot of these little details because I feel like these kinds of things that artists, creators, storytellers spend like hours working on, right? Doing and then revisiting and redoing and deleting and then redoing. This takes a lot of work.
Yes.
To but some of the best artists, they don't do it out of just something superficial. They do it for a very sort of fulfilling reason, right? Because like they're born storytellers, they're born actors, things like that, right? They're real artists, for lack of a better term. So back to sad and tired, Miss SAT. She is a little muppet, if you're familiar with her, that I'll show occasionally for some things. The reason I show her very briefly is one, she swears a lot, and two, it's very difficult for me to set up her rigging to make it appear, because I do this weird trick where I switch between two cameras so that way I talk and then she talks, right? So any person that rigs models knows this is kind of a pain to deal with. But um and also, trivialization parody is my weakest in terms of me being able to write it effectively. um so whenever I bust her out, she's very crude, she's very mean, she's very cynical, she swears a lot. But she's more than just kind of a one-dimensional character, because I love making very multi-dimensional characters. So, are you familiar with the Sundari or
Yes, I am.
Sundere? Yes, she's a
Yes.
bit of a Sundere. Sometimes, she might throw in an occasional kind word or phrase or something like that, just to show that she still has a bit of a caring side. That's just me being a big anime fan. So I couldn't help but make her a bit Sundari. Like I could have just made her like Mandy from Billy and Mandy. Just kind of straight evil and just always right, like always on top of things. But she's a bit more Sundari to throw in a bit of that anime feel to it.
That is really nice. So, would you say that when you and then I don't know why I didn't think of this one initially. There's two animes that are actually fairly popular on Netflix now that pop into mind that kind of have that trope and they kind of poke and make fun at these tropes. One is Uncle from Another World, and the
Hmm.
other one is the House Husband, Ways of the House Husband. Uh, Both shows are actually very good in that. And now that you point this out, I think that that is probably my favorite form of humor. would be the second one that you mentioned. I can't remember that name for the life of
Was
me.
it inversion or
Inversion.
trivialization? Ah, yes,
Inversion.
inversion. I do
Yeah,
love inversion.
yeah, it seems to be, to me, one of the more difficult to do and execute properly, because you have to have a very strong, solid understanding of the source material,
Oh,
and then also
definitely.
a way to turn it and make that, amusing. I find that interesting. Now, I noticed that your character has face paint, but it is very
Mm.
close in terms of representation to the character, the Crow. Would you say that that was where that inspiration came from?
Oh, actually, I didn't think of that. I did see The Crow at a very young age. I think I was, I don't know, maybe like 10 or 11 when I saw The Crow. So it might be subconscious. I feel like artists dig from everything that they've experienced, whether they know it or not. But I would say my active inspirations, the people I was actively looking at for inspiration, would be William Murderface, Shrek,
Ah,
of course. Um, there was this one guy from this one H anime. I forget his name, but he was from this one H anime where like they kind of did an inversion of the ugly bastard where he's still an ugly bastard, but he had like a heart of gold. I forget his name though. But it stuck with me, that guy. I'm like, wow, they really took ugly bastard and made him like not an asshole, right?
oh,
It was him. And the third one, if you're familiar with JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, there's this one
very.
character. Oh, are you familiar with part 8, Jojolian?
So that would be the Stardust. Was that Stardust Crusaders or was
No,
that?
so no, so part 8 would be like, so part 8 is currently manga only. It's near the end.
Oh, after the retro when they kind of basically reverted everything back because of the
R-
whole.
right, right, right. So that would be after the Steel Ball Run race, after part 7.
That's the one I was thinking of, not Stardust Crusader. So I haven't read part 8 yet, but I am familiar with JoJo. So everything up to part 8, I'm pretty up to speed on.
Oh, okay. So there's this one character called Jobin, and really, I really liked Jobin's original design where he had so basically Jobin has these scars that run vertically across his face, and he got him from this rock disease, right? This sounds like craziness, and it absolutely is craziness. Like if you read Jojolian, it's absolutely insane. But like this character Jobin, he has in his original design, he had 2 rows of scars across his face from his rock disease. But then Araki changed his design a bit later on, so he only has 1 row of scars across his eyes. I much preferred his 2 rows of scars, and I liked it so much I incorporated it into Joey's makeup, where he has one line of scars down the eyes and a second one which is represented by the border of the face, which I think is really serves for the whole focus on the face appeal of virtual streamers. And if I could just throw in a quick tangent from before,
Of course.
um just to just so things are clear, right? I'm the type of parody artist that comes from a place of appreciation, because many parody, well, not many, but I know some parody artists come from a place of hate where they very much dislike the thing they're parodying, and I can understand why, right? Like, it gives them motivation or whatever, but I'm not coming from hate of virtual streamers. I very much appreciate virtual streamers. That's why I'm so good at parodying them, because I know what they do, I know what their culture's like.
Correct. I can definitely see that because instead of being a parody, of the actual artistic expression and being someone who is very hateful with it, you're actually paying reverence to it, and that's something
Of
that I
course,
kinda
yes.
see, especially with the amount of time that you put into it. Now,
Oh,
one
of
thing I've noticed about your character is the outfit is kind of, it puts me in the place of, like, a mime from, I wanna say, like, the '50s, especially because of
mm,
the striped shirt with the
right.
overalls, or actually with the jeans and suspenders. Now, where, if you don't mind me asking, does the red scarf come from?
Ah, good question. So, I was really hoping that, like, it would just make my day. It would just put the cherry on my Sunday if someone managed to figure it out. But I'll say it because you did ask. So the red scarf, right, is actually not a scarf. It's actually a red fishnet stocking. And there's only one
Ah,
other character I made with a red fishnet stocking, that being Miss Perundes. She only has one red fishnet stocking on her left leg that goes all the way from the toes all the way up. The second one doesn't have one. That would be this one right here.
That is nice. You know, if I had more familiarity with the 2 characters, I can definitely see that, because the only reason I was thinking scarf, because, I mean, from looking at it without having the idea placed in my head of it being anything other than a kerchief, a scarf, or anything like that, that's actually really good. That's really
Mm.
good. Like, hats
Actually,
off to you.
there's another little interesting motif about it. So, one thing about Joey's character is there are a lot of uses of lines in his character. You know, his makeup has these sort of lines going up and down. His shirt has lines that go sideways, and his tie right, the red tie has crisscross lines. They're all straight lines.
Oh.
So I took the motif of lines and used it against Miss Perundi's, in that in her design she has a lot of curls as opposed to lines, right? So Joey has a lot of straight lines going up and down, straight lines going side to side, and of course crisscross on the scarf. But Miss Perundi's has a lot of curves, a lot of curls and swirls, and basically almost anything that isn't a straight line, to sort of show the dichotomy between the design of Joey and the design of Miss Perundi's, to show that they're sort of opposites in that way.
Interesting. Now, and throughout your just normal day-to-day life, do you find yourself at times, either coming up with, different ideas and concepts for Joey King, or do you find yourself kind of having him bleed over into your everyday life, your 9 to 5, so to speak?
Oh, honestly, it's been a bit of both. It's been a bit of both. It's a weird scenario being a streamer for any amount of time and for a consistent schedule. Like when I have to play Joey, like 3 times a week, and be myself. It's been a mix of both. I actually have a very specific example of one where it's Joey affecting me, right? Because I obviously created Joey, so Joey's whole creation is based off of me. But okay, like for Joey's personality, he is madly in love with Miss Perundi. She is the absolute best, right? She's the best
Oh.
streamer, best everything, right? Um, but when I started making Miss Perundi's design, because first I made Joey's design, then I made Miss Perundi's design, right? When I started making her design, I honestly really didn't like her that much. She felt kind of too full of herself, right? She was too full of herself. She felt conceited. She didn't feel all that. It didn't feel deserved for her to be such an important character in Joey's mind. But the more I started drawing her and started putting because like honestly, if I didn't put myself in Joey's mind, I probably never would have finished her design because I just didn't like her that much, right? I was like, I don't know, this character just doesn't seem good. It does seem like a good character. So I put myself in Joey's mind and I'm like, okay, wait a minute. If I was Joey, what would he say? How would he be in this scenario, right? He's drawing fan art of Miss Prundies, for example, right? What would he think? Well, he'd think that she's perfect. She'd think that she's great. She'd think that this art would be much appreciated. And once I started getting into that mindset, it sort of affected how I started drawing her. Like I started to like drawing her. And eventually I thought, yeah, she's actually a pretty good character. And I started writing more lore about her and things like that. So that would be a very specific example where Joey has kind of affected me outside of the outside the camera, outside the mic. In terms of me affecting Joey, that would other than me writing all his lore and all the things he does. But are you familiar with mycology?
Uh, Slightly, and just so that I'm, make sure that I'm on the right track here, we're talking in terms of, like, fungal and
Yes.
mushroom group. Okay, then, yes, I'm actually fairly familiar.
Yes, yes. So I guess the way I have affected Joey is me myself, I put some of my interests in Joey, one of them being mycology. I'm really into mushrooms, fungi, that kind of thing. And I was like, well, how does this fit with Joey? Like, as much as I would love to add it, how does this fit? So, you could argue, oh, I'm just forcing it to fit, but I I feel like I came with a nice, interesting balance on how Joey is a bit of a mycologist himself, being that Joey and mushrooms are very similar in that they stay away from direct sunlight. You just give them a little bit of water, and they'll grow. They'll grow, right? So I try to keep a bit of myself in Joey, and a bit of Joey has infected my mind in that first example. So that's a bit of art and a bit of art and artist and art.
I see now. Now you've brought up mushrooms. It's something I'm actually quite interested in. Not necessarily for the psilocybin or the psychedelic effects of it, just for in terms of the positive effects it has on the body. I'm a very large proponent of, you are what you eat, and
Mhm.
eating good, healthy foods is kind of the best way to help extend our life, as well as just to have us think and be a little bit more clear when we approach life. Would you say for yourself, where does your interest in terms of mycology, mushrooms, or even just fungi in general, where does it come from? I know Joey's a fun guy, haha, pun, but where do you think that comes from?
I mean, personally, I've always been a fan of mushrooms and fungi since I was a kid. I believe, see, because okay, so I was taught in science that you got your three kingdoms: animal kingdom, plant kingdom, and the fungal kingdom, in that order, right? First animal, then plant, then fungal, right? I didn't pay it much mind, but then I realized it's in order of how much importance they have to us as humans. Us being on top with the animal kingdom, plants being next because we know the most about them, and fungal being last because we don't know too much about fungal as much as plants and animals. Um, and then I think now, back when I was a kid, I was Christian, right? So I think it was back during Sunday school, right? They were talking about Genesis and about how, God made everything. And I remember specifically because I recalled hearing that science class lecture where they said God made all the animals on this day and all the plants on this day, and he made all this and he made all that. And I thought, where do the mushrooms come from? What was the mushroom day? Because the animals get their own day, the plants get their own day, the fungus didn't get their own day. Were they lumped in with plants? Was that what it was? So ever since then, I thought, okay, mushrooms are kind of like the underdogs here, right? Like no one really talks about them. They barely have their own kingdom, and even if they do, people don't even like really recognize this. They just think there's plants. So then, as a kid, I got a bit defensive about mushrooms. I'm like, they're not plants. I eventually grew out of it as I learned about stoicism and things like that. I eventually grew out of it. Um, but mushrooms have just always kind of held a place in my heart because of I really resonate with them, honestly.
I think most people do, without even necessarily knowing it. For me, it's probably been about the last 15 years where I've really gotten to mushrooms and using them for like physical performance. As a man, I had always felt that, you know, higher testosterone means longer life and also means that you're a manly, manly, brawny man. So I began looking into like the foods that help the most. There was a point in my life where I kind of did not, consume meat product, and during that time, I was like, where am I going to get this protein? Where am I going to get complete proteins, as well as the proper branch chain amino acids?
Mhm.
And that's when I began looking into fungal foods. So that's where I started eating a lot more, and not just like the button mushrooms or the white mushrooms that you see. I
Mhm.
started finding things like lion's mane, which is actually my favorite mushroom, cordyceps, as well as like blue oyster mushrooms and things of that nature. And just basically consuming those and then noticing the difference that I had in my body and how I felt, as well as how clearly I thought. That then led me down a rabbit hole of looking into and researching mushrooms. That's when I came across psilocybin, something that I'm still not comfortable enough or brave enough to cross that bridge yet. But I did notice that one of the oldest, most preserved things in the world that has never changed or gone through any physical change or evolutions or adaptations like animals or plants have would be mushrooms. There was a mushroom discovered inside of a volcano that was, I want to say, 10 or 12,000 years old. Don't
Wow.
quote me here. And it still held the same shape that you would find from like a small colony mushroom now. And I found that extremely interesting because typically things have to grow and adapt and change because it's becoming more accustomed or acclimated to, the environment, where a mushroom has not had to do that, which means it's more than likely, to give a fun Dragon Ball reference, it's already in its final form, versus having to go through all these changes. And then also on top of that, I am not a believer in the stoned ape theory, but I do believe that mushrooms played a dramatic role in the mental expansion of the human animal when it was out running across the plains trying not to be eaten, as well as finding this nice fleshy food on the ground. And all of a sudden, you had the introduction of psilocybin, and you have these mind altering things that occurred. I believe that kind of walks hand in hand while why you have such a jump in the mental acuity of the human being from one point in time to another. So mushrooms are something I'm extremely interested in. If anyone out there is listening to this, I strongly recommend looking into Paul Stamets. He has great information and research when it comes to mushrooms, and he actually does have a really good supplement that I love. I take the Stammet 7 as well as the Lion's Mane because I am just a very big believer in reishi mushrooms and turkey tails, especially if you want to help boost your immune system. So, are you familiar with Paul Stamets at all?
Honestly, no. Like, I'm only familiar with the mushrooms that are in my area, so this is probably a new mushroom, which is great because I love learning about new mushrooms. There's so many mushrooms around the world. You
Yes,
could
there
spend
is.
forever learning about them.
Yes, they I mean, they are literally everywhere and constantly present, and as I mentioned earlier, I do enjoy gardening and realizing that the mycelium
Oh yes.
underground and the network that it's creating and connecting, plants together as well throughout this process, especially when I compost or if I have my vermiculture bin with all my worms in it, and I'm going through that. I love the idea and the aspect of how it creates respiration in the ground, based on, what type of fuel is being funneled into it, how much oxygen is being funneled into it, how much moisture is allowed to exist. I just find it really interesting. And I mean, this is a very unthought out theory. I'm going to say here, but I
Mhm.
do believe that because the way the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom are generated and how they act, I almost feel as if on top should necessarily be mushrooms because it almost feels as if we are doing everything that we need to do in order to allow for mushrooms to continue to propagate. And I just find it extremely interesting. It's funny. I have not had an opportunity to click with someone else other than my wife on mushrooms. So I find that very interesting.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like honestly, like mushrooms are just the weirdest, and I love them about that because, like mushrooms they're a lot closer to animals than they are to people, right? Like on the genome because they lack chloroplast and things like that. But also because of that, a lot of mushrooms taste a lot more like animal than plant, right? Like chicken of the forest kind of tastes like chicken. There's all kinds of mushrooms that taste like meat products, and like not only that, they have the weirdest attributes. Some mushrooms are kind of like some of the stuff I read about mushrooms sound like Pokemon, right? Like shiitake mushrooms, they grow faster if they get hit by lightning. Like what? That's ridiculous. It's
It's
true
an
though.
evolution stone.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a thunderstone right there. It's crazy.
I do find that interesting, for myself especially. I do agree. I mean, especially the lion's mane mushroom, when cooked, especially, like, even lightly seasoned, they taste like seafood, they taste like lobster.
Oh, I'm gonna
So
have to check that out.
yeah, it's
It's
a
really interesting.
delicious, like, and they're nice big bulbous heads, like, they are delicious. I mean, I love them. It takes, people for the first time that they're seeing them, but you being a mushroom fan, I think you'll be fine. It takes
Mhm.
people a little getting used to because it doesn't look like the typical mushroom that everyone's accustomed to. It
Oh
looks
yeah, of
like it might have
course.
a little fur on it and stuff like that, but it
Oh,
is absolutely delicious. I love them.
oh man, like yeah, mushroom, yeah, and like the physical look of mushrooms is also quite interesting. Like some mushrooms they'll turn blue when you cut them. Some of them are furry. Some of them have spores. Some of them have gills. Yeah, honestly, like I've been a big nerd at like, I guess fungal nomenclature, right? Like every little thing about a mushroom is named based on like how it's made, where it comes from, if it's like super veil is full or partial veil and all that. It's all very interesting. Like I want to get to the point where I could just look at a mushroom. Well, no, no. Okay, actually, it's not that easy. So let me not make it pretend like it is that easy. Where I can examine a mushroom and name it, because you can't just name a mushroom just from looking at it. You got to look at multiple things. You got to look at the veil. You got to look at the spores, right? You can't just look at it and identify it, right? You need to really examine this mushroom before you can like accurately name it. You can't just like look at it and be like, "Oh, this is this mushroom." It's not that easy.
No, I would agree. I do think that Paul Stamets will be an interesting read for you. He's a person who's really big on psilocybin. He also is introducing. It's a type of mycelium that he's been able to kind of separate and actually help, because a lot of bees, especially here in the states, are dying because they're being infected. I can't think of the name of the bacteria or the virus that does kill them, but introducing that mycelium spore base has actually been able to help allow the bees to fight off and increase their immune system to where they can fight these diseases and infections off, allowing them to kind of go ahead and prosper. So I think it'll be a fun read for you. And I do find it interesting. The thing that I find the most interesting about this conversation is I'm having a conversation with a virtual character,
Mhm.
so that's not lost on me, but I'm having a conversation with a virtual character who is a representation as an avatar for a person who has created this character, and we're discussing things that actually have to do with everyday life outside of the virtual realm, and I don't think that that is lost on me. I do enjoy the fact that not only have you chosen to take your character and use them as a representation of, you know, for the parody, but also allowing you to speak freely without having to become, grotesque or vile or just,
Mhm.
I really appreciate that fact, and I just wanna say that as a person who is not very well versed in the arts, I know what I like, and that's really about as versed as I can get. Like, I understand the logical breakdown of lines, I really used to love, like, Greek paintings because they used lines and how everything came to a point, and I can definitely see that, within the character that you created here. I just wanna say that I think the time that you spent on this character, the time that you've actually been willing to share with me and the audience on this show, they're greatly appreciated, and I can see your hard work, and I do hope that whatever it is that you're looking to get out of this, not only do you get that, you get any and everything else that's coming to you because your hard work is recognized.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Honestly, I could say with almost, 90% certainty, I believe I have gotten it. Because, I went into this with the expectation that, probably no one's going to see me. And that's kind of been fairly consistent, honestly. Like, I don't get too many viewers, but that's not why I went into it. I went into it for the art, right? Like, I can imagine most people that get into it, there are three things that may motivate them to different degrees, right? One is the artistic satisfaction. Two is the popularity, and three is the monetary incentive. I'm not saying any of these are bad, but I'm saying, each streamer has these three things in mind. There might be a fourth thing I haven't thought of, but with these three things in mind, and each one is of different importance to them, right? I would say for me, the artistic expression of it's probably the most important. Like, it would be nice if I got some monetary value out of it. It'd be nice if I had some popularity, mainly because there's some things I want to do that require other people's participation, which
I
I
see.
think would be really fun. But I would say the artistic expression of it is the most important to me, right? Not everyone will have these same priorities, right? Other people have different priorities for why they're streaming, but that's fine, right? Like, I'm not going to judge people for why they get into it or not. All these things are, perfectly acceptable reasons to get into streaming. But for me, because the art is the most important, I would say I've achieved it. I've done a lot of things I didn't think were possible before, right? Like streaming. Like, my first stream, not like live, my first ever stream I ever did was so bad. I could only last for like 2.5 minutes in front of the camera before I like couldn't handle it anymore. Cause that's just the kind of person I was. I just couldn't handle being in front of the camera, being in front of the mic, even with a virtual avatar for like more than like a couple of minutes. That one was so, and that was a just a pure private stream, me just testing what it's like sitting in front of the camera and talking. The next one I did the day after was a bit better. It lasted about 30 minutes before I was like, okay, I think I've had enough. Now I can stream for a couple hours. Nothing crazy like some of the more endurance based streamers, but now I feel like I've made a lot of progress. And with that, I was like, okay, I could stream for a couple hours. What's next? I did a cover song. Can I do that? I don't know. So I started working on it, and eventually I did. I did a cover of the song King, which very appropriately named. I
I
was like,
would agree.
okay, that that is something virtual streamers do. They make covers. I did one, right? What else do they do? They make ASMR. That's gonna be my next thing. I'm gonna do an ASMR video. I want to sort of touch a little bit of every pie in terms of the things you could do as a virtual streamer, um, because that's part of the art, right? I want to be able to parody it, to show it, to express it, to give it respect, and also to experience me as an artist actually doing it. So I would say I have achieved what I wanted to. Not everything. There are some cool things that I have in mind that require other people's participation, which I can't really do unless like people come to watch the streams. But that's why I'm still here. That's why I'm still streaming.
I like the sound of that. And one thing that we had talked about before we actually began here was that you're looking to kind of branch off into the podcast space. Now,
Oh
I
yeah.
would love to hear why you're looking to branch off into the podcast space, as well as what type of podcast you'd like to cultivate and present to the world. This is something I'm going to be sharing with any of the previous guests that I've had, as well as future guests, because after this conversation that I've had with you, there's an amount of, and this is funny because I am talking to a character
Mhm.
there is an amount of authenticity that I can hear from you, and there's an amount of passion that it's impossible to ignore. So let's hear about it. I'm very interested in sharing this information.
Yeah, so I want to get into podcasts because I've noticed it's kind of hard for me to appropriately have open discussions with people. And this is something that I've always enjoyed, like outside of virtual streaming and things like that. I love having open discussions, right? Like things like debates, things like storyboarding. I think is really fun, right? Like just talking with people about like the characters you make, the lore, kind of like what I did previously. I think that's a lot of fun because I love seeing how artists like to skin a cat, so to say, right? Like how they go about making their stories. I can really see it in their passion and the things they say. um so I want to get into podcasting because I love open discussion, right? And I don't think it's too against my character, because I feel like a lot of virtual streamers that kind of do interview style podcasts, it's very sort of kind of superficial topics. I want to get into really deep topics, kind of like what we're getting in now. So because like there's a bit of taboo with free thinking and going too deep into topics and having this sort of open discussion. And I was like, well, if that's what virtual streamers don't do, the inversion of it would be to do it, right? So it fits with both what I like, which is open discussion, free thought, and things like that, and also virtual streaming, or at least the inversion of it, at least.
No, I can definitely see that. And I can definitely say, just from the interaction that we've had here, it's something that seems to be right on level with Joey's character. I think Joey fits extremely well in that space. And I think it'll be a really fun, journey for anyone that is going to have an opportunity to come on and sit down and talk with you. Which is actually why I wish that I had my camera with this, because I have the biggest, goofiest grin on my face because
Oh, same.
this has been a very fun, discussion and interview on a topic that is typically one, taboo, and two, can be quite contentious.
Oh,
Um,
definitely.
yeah, I personally find that a lot of people are so hung up with these definitions, which is actually why I even initially posed the question about what these things are. And you kind of hit the nail right on the head through through your explanations of them, because they are so fluid. You can look
Mhm.
at a character from the 80s and you look at a character today, like even just the evolution of how big and then how small the action hero got, and then how big the action hero is getting again. And it really just kind of boils down to whatever society is defining at that moment in time, and has a lot less to do with how people feel personally and on the inside. And I think that if people feel a certain way about things, whether it be what masculinity is or what femininity is or what a good American is versus a bad American, I think that if people can actually begin to accept themselves, it allow them to accept other people, because there's going to be a lot less fear there. There's a lot less apprehension there. And from your character and how your character presents, I mean, everything that your character does, from the way that they stand, the way that they move, the way that they gesture, these are all very open, while at the same time being a bit reserved,
Mm.
animations and actions. And I think you taking the time to create your character and doing that with it, along with the voice you have chosen for him, I think this is I think it's a win. I think the more people that experience this character, the more people that will like it.
Oh yeah, like personally. Now again, just to keep things clear, I'm not just doing it so people like me, not to, sound combative or anything, but just to get back into it. I'm doing it mainly for the art of expressing it. I would love if people could like it. That's great. But I also don't mind if people hate it. I could understand, with the character I'm portraying, I'm kind of putting a bit of a target on my back here. But, if people don't like it, that's fine. That's also part of that's what's great about performance art. You can like it and you can dislike it, but it enhances the experience, right? Like you can see a performance artist do their thing and absolutely hate it, but that's part of the experience. That will enhance the artistic value of it. People can like it too. That also enhance the artistic value of it, right? So, I would love it if people liked it, but I don't mind if people hate it. It makes the art much more fulfilling either way.
No, I can see that. And I guess a better example of it is for myself. Even if it isn't something that I dislike, I tend to be able to find, I guess and this is like quoting a movie that no one ever knows or likes, the collateral beauty of it. As an example is, I I have basically no time, But when I do have time, I spend like 30 minutes, a week or maybe an hour if I'm lucky, playing one video game, and that's Fallout 76.
Mhm.
Uh, Most people don't play it, don't like it. I've just been really enthralled with the Fallout lore ever since the original one I believe I had it on PC. But my favorite thing about it is it's sometimes you go to a camp and that can be a trap camp where basically you walk in, something happens, your character dies, and they get to take all your stuff without any repercussion. Most people rage at it. They talk about how crazy it is. To me, I think it's just the idea and the concept that I fell into the trap. I take the personal responsibility about that. And I usually message them saying, hey, that was a great trap. Enjoy the stuff. And that's kind of how I've always looked at the world, and especially coming from being a background of being a person who loved the WWF and like loving the heel turns or when someone would turn babyface and seeing that and being able to appreciate that. So for me, even if it's something that I dislike, like Sailor Moon as an example. I dislike
Mhm.
Sailor Moon, but I can see why someone would like it, and which is why I don't hate it. I dislike it, but I don't hate it, if that makes any sense.
Okay, I see what you mean. I think I would describe it best as you appreciate it at least, even if it's not your cup of tea.
Correct, and that's why I love the idea of having a podcast and discussing these things with people because even if it's something I disagree on, like the next series that I plan on doing is gonna focus on a lot more in terms of race and hopefully I get a chance to deal with, people who are from the complete opposite spectrum of me and, they are gonna be a supremacist of whatever their background is, and as long as they're willing to have an open discussion, like, I don't hate their point of view of the world even if their point of view of the world will relegate me to being less than human. I just appreciate the fact that someone is actually willing to stand on what they believe in and have an open discussion about it. And we can agree to disagree, or we can agree to agree, or anything in between. And I think that that's what the world just needs a little bit more of because there is this false dichotomy of the one tribe versus another tribe
Oh,
when
yes.
it's still just people that are in these tribes.
Of course. Honestly, I kind of wish we disagreed on a bit more stuff just because you brought that up. Because, like, we've been very colloquial. We've been, very, we didn't interrupt each other at all. I'm not sure if that's fairly common, but, we didn't really interrupt each other at all, really. Um, unless it was like a burning question or something like that. So I kind of wish we disagreed on some stuff on this one because it seems like we both kind of agreed on things, which is fine. That happens. But now, it's got me curious. It's got me wondering, like, you know, I think you're fairly civil. I would assume I act fairly civil. So I would be curious, like, how we would have how this podcast would be if we disagreed on something, right? Like, wouldn't you be curious about that? Um, but yeah, like I feel like this is how open discussions should be, right? They should be civil, even if people don't agree on things like that.
No, I agree. It's funny because we're talking about what if we did disagree, and it's another agreement. But in all honesty, I've had a couple of contentious podcasts, and as long as we can remain civil, and I'm speaking in terms of the other, people that I've had on the show, it's fairly the same. I allow anyone to come across and state their opinion and go for it. And even if it's like something that can be proven wrong, I don't like to be the person to say, you know what, you're wrong. What you think is invalid. I'll provide information. And if they want to go ahead and research that information and reach a different topic or reach a different conclusion, then all the better for them. If they don't want to research it, if they feel like they're right and they'll let their emotions override their logical side, then hey, I'm all for that as well. To me, I think the ability to disagree is it's a very undervalued talent. And the more that we do it, I think the quicker or the easier it is for us to get to whatever that one so-called truth is, which I don't even believe exists. But I'm just I'm a big proponent of back and forth, whether it be positive or negative, or something I agree with or disagree with.
Right, same. I'm curious as to your reason for it, but I can disclose my reason. So when I talk with somebody and they disagree, they're being illogical, they're being all these kinds of things, right? I'm not gonna personally, I'm not gonna try to change their mind, or at least forcefully change their mind. What I'm gonna do is I'll let them know what I think, why I think it, and maybe be like, okay, this is why I think it. What do you think about that? Right. And they might wander off, they might agree, they might disagree, might do a bit of ad hominem. That's fairly common. But like, right, so the reason I don't try to force them into thinking the way I think is, well, actually there are multiple reasons, but one of the reasons is I'm not sure if I'm right. I could just tell them this is what I think is right, given the information I know and the facts I know and things like this is what I think is right. Even if what you're saying sounds illogical, sounds crazy, and it's full of fallacies, and you're insulting me and all that, you might be right. I'll never be so what's the word? It's escaping.
Certain,
Yeah,
positive.
certain positive. It's kind of like pretentious, right? To say that, oh, I'm definitely 100% right. Chances are I'm probably mostly right. Chances are I'm probably mostly right. There's a
That
small
is
chance they might
interesting.
be right. So I never put that like out of my mind, right? That no matter how illogical or whatever it is that they're saying, there's probably a little bit of truth to it. Otherwise, they wouldn't be believing it. I want to kind of get that nugget of truth and be like, okay, I now have a slightly more nuggets of truth in my brain now, even if it's covered in like fallacies and like, illogical talk and whatnot. I'm like, okay, they think this because of this, right? That's got to be it.
I
And
have to
I'm
agree
now,
with you.
yeah, and now I'm slightly more right because now I have slightly more nuggets of knowledge in my brain.
I mean, it's funny. The reason I was laughing is that's pretty much a word for word representation of why I do it. I
Oh, okay, it's the
look at
same.
it
Okay,
as,
nice.
yeah, I mean, I 100%, the only thing that I'm 100% certain about is that there is the potential for me to be 100% wrong.
Oh, okay, okay, okay.
And that's kind of how I've approached life. And I even kind of compare it to, if I knew every language in the world, I believe at that point I can then better describe or more accurately describe the world and what it really is, because
Mhm.
so many different languages have words that don't exist in other languages. But
Right.
because that word exists in another language, that means that that thing exists. And I know for myself, that's a major point in doing it, because I didn't live the background or the time that someone else has. I think about myself sometimes like, well, what if I was only 5'3"? What if I was overweight, or what if I had acne, or what if I was socially seen as unattractive? If I had all of these things, my entire mind state would be different.
Mhm.
And I'm all that's why I'm always open to that. And that's why I'm always open to the discussion, because I mean, just the same way that masculinity and femininity change and evolve, so does the truth. It changes and it evolves into something else. I mean, we used to put asbestos in the ceilings because it was a great
Mhm.
insulator, and then we
Right.
realized that it killed us. So,
Right, of course. So, okay, actually, this might actually be the first point of contention where we might not agree on something. So, personally speaking, I don't think that the truth is something that can change. I think the truth is something that stays the same. And what is the thing, right? Personally, so okay, you said the only thing you know to be true. And again, stop me if I'm saying this incorrectly or if if I'm not saying it in a way that truly represents what you're trying to say. But the way I interpreted it was the only thing you know that is true is that you don't know everything, right? Something like that?
more along the lines of, the only thing that I know of in that is true is that I could be 100% wrong, and that kind of
Right.
encompasses everything from the 0 to the 99 up to the 100.
Right. Okay, yes. So there's one thing that I know is true, and that is logic. I think logic is constant in the universe. I think logic is the one thing I know is true. Now we're talking about things like, 1 plus 1 is 2. If A and B is C, then C is A and B, things like that. I think logic is constant and true. And I've let that shape me in my morals and things like that. Like my morals are very logic based, right? So that I think might be our first point of contention right there as to what is true, what is not true.
Oh, well, for me, I would say the majority of my life, the way that I think, it's never in a lineal path. I kind of lay things out in my head like it's on a chessboard,
Hmm.
and I am very logic based myself. The
Right,
only reason I would say that, it's a math problem, for example. As long as you're inputting into the formula the correct numbers, you're always going to get the same answer. The only thing is, well, what if the actual formula itself is missing something? What if the formula itself is a fallacy? So it's
right.
not it's that is actually where it acts outside of my logical side, and it kind of gets more into like my philosophical side and my what if scenario side, I don't think that that is the way things are or the way things will be. However, I don't close myself off completely to it. But I do feel that in my own self and within my own sphere, I can, obtain truth. Although I don't know how long that will hold up, after I'm not on this planet anymore, or after, there's a change. Because, like, for example, the sun comes up every day as long as you're not, somewhere in Anchorage. The sun
Right.
comes up every day. And there is going to be a time in which it doesn't, because the sun is just still a big ball of gas that
Mhm.
eventually is going to, die. And when that happens, it's not going to come up. The earth is going to freeze, and it's going to go from this planet of many climates and, one and one equaling two, to becoming this giant ball of ice.
Right.
So there's and that's the only way. It's more when it's a philosophical representation of it. Outside of that, when it comes to logic and how it exists on this plane of existence, 100% agree. I mean, like, one plus one is two. And I think if more people based their decisions and lifestyles on logic, it would be a little bit more of a easier existence versus it, being boiled down or based on something or someone's emotions. That's actually why I'm working on I guess it's going to end up being a video essay on two films, one being 300 and the
Mhm.
second one being RoboCop, which I think
Okay.
is the largest, like, RoboCop to me is the largest piece of propaganda in the world. If you have robots that are actually policing us, then if you commit the crime, you get in trouble for the crime, versus a person having, their own input on it. So yeah, it's like I'm the opposite on RoboCop. I think it is the worst thing that can happen to humanity.
Yeah, I'm gonna be interested in seeing that essay, honestly. I've also been interested in video essays. I was thinking of making a video essay on Chainsaw Man and a bit on masculinity and femininity. Um, because I tend to notice back to touch up on the masculinity and femininity thing. I feel like as a male, masculinity is having a hard time trying to cope with modern day society. And I feel like we see this in a lot of popular media, one being Chainsaw Man with the character Denji. So, that's in the back of my mind, the video essay on that. But, I got so many projects that I'm going to have to leave that in the back burner until I get my other stuff done.
Trust me, I can 100% relate. We are coming up on the 1 hour and 17-minute mark.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So
We've been talking for a little while.
yeah, but it's been good conversation. One
Definitely.
thing one thing I would like to do is, I would love to keep you in mind for future episodes, especially, when it comes to kind of dissecting something from a logical sense. I think that you and I can have a really good back and forth on that, and I'm also
Oh,
gonna
yeah.
try to find something we disagree on. I think I wanna have a
Definitely.
disagreement with you, you know?
Definitely. Like honestly, that was a bit of a reach on logic because I felt you were very logical. But I was like, okay, maybe there's like a little thing that we might disagree in terms of definition. But we'll see. We'll see. Because like I'm very curious because speaking with you, I've learned a lot, in terms of mushroom and logic and masculine and femininity. I hope it was mutual, honestly speaking, so that way we can both sort of grow from these podcasts.
I can easily say that's a yes. For myself, I feel like the information that you've provided in terms of the art form of it, because that's kind of the presentation that, as I'm looking at my idea and what I'm doing with this podcast, I can see where those things walk hand in hand. And in terms of when it comes to humor, humor is, I think, one of well, it was the only way that I could find a way to cry when I was younger, because you
Mhm.
can laugh so hard that you cry, so to speak.
Right.
And I really enjoy the knowledge that you have in terms of the actual, this is what it's defined as, and here is why it is what it is, and here is, exact representations of it. And then what that did was I was like, oh man, I really do enjoy Shrek, and the reason I enjoy Shrek are because of these things. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, I really do enjoy Scary Movie, and the reason I enjoy Scary Movie is because of these things. But I have to be in the right mood for something that's going to be so over the top. And I think that was actually very informative for me. And I mean, to the point to where I've taken it down and I'm going to go back and look into this myself. So yeah, I
Oh yeah.
really appreciate
Ho
that.
Honestly, like, I could talk about it for hours. Like, if you put me in front of a mic, I could talk about a lot of things for hours. Logic, ethics, parody, the arts. Like, there's a bunch of things I'm just so passionate about. I could talk about it for hours and never talk about, like, the same thing twice. But, you know, unfortunately, we don't have hours and hours, but I would love to come back on. We could talk about something else. Maybe touch you up on up again on masculinity and femininity, because I know it's a lot of things are very interconnected. So it would not surprise me if we touch upon masculinity and femininity in another podcast, because it might be related.
I agree. Oddly enough, it seems to kind of be ingrained into just the fabric of everything that we do, because even the way, you put your buttons up, or the way what finger you wear a ring on, or what side you put an earring in, then you're venturing into, well, that's a masculine way of doing it, or that's a feminine way of doing it.
Oh man, don't get me started on the earring thing. That was so confusing back in middle school.
You're telling me. Trust me. You're telling me, because it's like this weird, nebulous, undefined thing that's kind of like the unwritten rules of baseball. It's like everyone's supposed to know, but no one ever talks about it or understands it. And it's like, well, if your button's on this side, that makes you a woman. And if your earring is on this side, that makes you this and that makes you that. And to me, it's like, really?
Mm.
Like, really? That's what we've reduced ourselves to?
Honestly, I have a good feeling even the people that make this up don't know it, because they don't know when it's going to change, when it's going to flip right around. Like no one knew when vampires were going to be from manly to unmanly. No one knew, but it just happened. So I think even the people that make these rules on the earrings and on what's masculine, what's feminine, I think they don't even know, honestly.
I agree, and I think, it's funny because you and I both had that thing and had the similarity in which we say, we're open to being incorrect. I think it's someone who is doubling down, tripling down, quadrupling down so much on how they feel, and thinking that there is, no other opinion that's even valid or worth considering, and I think it just ends up spiraling and snowballing into this, this just amalgamation of just feelings, and
Just
they're
feeling.
just yeah,
You
just
know,
feeling.
I have a really good theory on it, on why that is and how that comes about, but that's kind of more like a 10-20 minute thing. I don't know. Maybe I can touch up on it real quick, just like a real quick rundown, because I
Let's do
really
it.
want to. Okay, so this is why I think that happens. I think first, when you're born as a baby, as a child, right? The first thing you learn is who you are, right? What my name is. These are my parents. This is mine. This is mine. This is mine. Right? These people love me. Right? The first thing you learn as a baby is who you are. Right? This is my body. This is my arm. These are my parents. Right? These are my siblings. Yada yada. Yada. But the second thing you learn, and this is when you become a child, an adolescent, a young adult, and even some people are still learning this even into way adulthood. I've seen this. People sometimes almost never grow out of this one. You learn what you're not, right?
Yes.
When you learn what you're not, I think that is where people learn probably some of their most disgusting biases and prejudices and stuff like that, right? So whether it's in elementary school or middle school or whatever, your peers, the students, other people will teach you what you're not. You're not this race. You're not this height. You're not with these cool kids. You're not with these lame kids, right? You're not with this. You're not with that. When you learn what you're not, I think, and this usually happens like, adolescence, young adult, and like I said before, even people that are in like late adulthood are still stuck in this phase. What you're not, right? They're still learning what they're not. And then when you learn what you're not, that's where you get all your biases and your prejudices and your, oh, they're this and they're that, because you're learning what you're not. So therefore, there's a you and there's a them, right?
I can totally see that.
That's my theory. Again, I'm no psychologist. I'm no Sigmund Freud. Don't come to me like, oh, where's my peer reviewed papers? No, this is just my theory. Okay, it's just a theory. But like, um, that's the Cliff Notes. I could talk about this subject for like hours, but the Cliff Notes version is that's how it becomes. And I think until we break out of that we really start to grow. Like I broke out of that with Stoicism, right? Being in control of only myself and not concerning myself with things outside of myself and outside of my control. That's how I broke out of this who I am and who I'm not, and prejudices and biases and all that.
I agree. You actually just gave me an idea for a future topic.
Oh yeah, sounds
Um,
cool.
I would actually like to have you on again,
Oh,
once I
I'd love to
complete
be
this
here.
series, and I'd love to talk about that in general, because that is, let's see, without giving too much away, Stoicism was my route out of that as well,
Mm-hmm.
and I really, 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 really love the idea of how we start with ourselves and then we create the other. and then
Mhm.
we don't see the other also as themselves.
Of course.
So, yeah, yeah, I'm gonna write that down. We're,
Oh yeah, definitely rumiate on that because I want to know what you think about that when we talk about it again. Because what you come up with might be totally different from what I come up with, and we could both be completely wrong, but it would be an
agreed.
amazing thing to talk about.
Agreed. I'd even a more what I'm gonna do is we're gonna sign out with the show. Hang on for a second, and we'll do a little bit of the rundown in regards to this future episode because I don't want to share too much in the episode that we're on right now. But Joey, thank you so much for being a guest today. Again,
Glad to be here.
no problem. Anything that you have to plug, please let everybody know where they can find you, where they can see all of the creations that you've put together.
Oh yeah, so I stream on YouTube. It's Joey D King on YouTube. I post some interesting stuff on Twitter, things like quotes that I think of, random thoughts, theories, kind of like the stuff we're talking about here, random story things on Twitter as well. It's Joey D King on Twitter. But I'm also going to be doing my own podcast. It's going to be kind of like this open discussion, but I also include half of it will be a lot of story building because I love story building. I'm going to have people come in talk about their characters. So half it's going to be open discussion. The other half of the podcast will be, people talking about their stories and their lore and things like have artists really get the spotlight for the hours and hours. I'm sure they work on their stories and their characters. It doesn't really get appreciated. So it's going to be called Big Top Podcast with Joey D. King. That also is another pun. Big Top being, circus carnival themed. And of course, it's short for Big Topic. Big Topic with Joey D.
That's
King.
actually pretty good.
So once I get that started, I would love to have anyone listening on or whoever's interested, contact me on Twitter, send me a DM or whatever, and I'll see what we can do.
Sounds good. And then everyone else, when this episode is actually released, we're going to make sure to have all of Joey's contacts inside the actual video itself. All of his links will be provided. So if there's anyone that's like wondering how it's spelled or anything that they get mixed up, it'll be there for you. But it is pretty straightforward. Joe King, Joey D. King, thank you so much for an amazing conversation today.
Oh,
Hang
definitely.
on, don't sign out quite yet. Everyone out there in the world of civil rhetoric, thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to this conversation. Hopefully, we can all start moving towards a better day, and that better day just basically meaning that you can accept and be accepted. Have a great day, all.
Take care. And I got to say, Larry, you're a real unicorn. It's hard to find people like you, honestly.
I agree. I agree.
Okay, take care.